And I think for us,
Mm.
we have to make sure that we're eating whatever it is that we're pulling up out of the word as a hardworking farmer. We've got to eat the crops first.
Welcome to Teach Through the Word, the podcast for Bible teachers. Chris Langham with you again, and with me again, Peyton Jones. Peyton, how's it going over there?
I'm sorry I'm here for you. I'm happy to be here. I'm loving this. But if you had been here a few seconds ago, hearing us come up with yet another theme song.
All right, and hopefully we'll have a real theme song sometime soon. But for the time being, this week we seem to be going through some 80s classics. So we'll see how that goes. Well, this is part 2 in our basic training series this week. We're doing basic training. This time is the heart of teaching. Today in part 2, we're going to get some essentials of the preacher. I'm going to introduce you to maybe my favorite Bible teacher. Bible teacher in the Bible is Ezra in the Old Testament. If you're not familiar with Ezra as a teacher, you got to get to know Ezra. Great guy. We'll get to that in just a couple minutes here. We are here to equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better, and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. This is your place to get equipped, get trained. While you're at it, get a behind the scenes look here at Through the Word. And let's get into it. Let's get into Ezra chapter 7. Peyton, what do you think of this guy, Ezra?
Well, I think he's pretty awesome. He actually led an entire revival, a reformation in the nation. So he's not bad.
It's the biggest revival, if you ask me, the biggest revival in the Old Testament, a massive revival of God's people coming out of exile. God prepared him. One of the things I love about Ezra as a person, Ezra did all of his preparation in exile. He grew up in the exile, and we learned that he devoted himself to his job before he ever had the chance to live it out. Years, probably decades, that he spent in exile, but preparing himself for his job. He's in the line of the high priest. So we know he knows that this is his calling, but he's living at a time without a temple. And yet he prepares himself for the work ahead. So let's get into that. Our focus is actually in Ezra chapter 7. In the basic training series, we really dive a little deeper into Ezra's backstory, but I want to get right to who he is at the heart in Ezra chapter 7 at verse 10. Verse 10 tells us, "For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel." Ezra had devoted himself. So essential of the preacher number 1 is devotion. If you're going to be a teacher of God's word, you've got to be devoted to it. Ezra devoted himself. Devotion, I looked up a definition for devotion. It means to be given to something, attentive to it, dedicated with a sense of responsibility towards it. Dedicated with a sense of responsibility. That's Ezra. Ezra devoted himself to this long before he ever had a chance to live it out. And I know for me as a young teacher, when I was brand new 20 years back, there was a lot stirring up in me. Like, I just wanted to get up there. I just wanted to get into the pulpit and deliver because people needed to hear. And so Peyton, how do you speak to a young teacher, somebody starting out, about their need to be devoted before they get up there and get entrusted?
Well, I think there's a connection. For example, if I walked up to you at the gym and on the body mass index, I was, grossly obese, and I said, "Hey, I can help you get in shape. Here's my card." You would never call me. And the reason is that you would say, "Oh man, that guy, he can't help me. He can't help himself." I hadn't earned the credibility. But, when Paul says study to show yourself approved, he's telling him, like my pastor used to tell me, "Hey, hit the books," as if saying, hit the weights, dig in, do what you got to do to put the reps in to actually get the results. Because then if I walked up to you and I was like a Greek Adonis, right? Like I had a washboard stomach and, instead of calves, I had cows, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'll totally call you." I've earned that respect and approval because I put the time in.
Yeah. And I think in that process, you're not just earning You're not just working towards the perfect body to say, "Hey, I've perfected exercise. I can help you do the same." You're also learning a process that humbles you. And that is so important coming from the pulpit. Arrogance in the pulpit is an immediate turnoff to me. If I can tell that someone is speaking there's a big difference, and you got to recognize the difference between authority and arrogance. We are called to speak with authority, but we're not called to speak with an arrogance that says, I am somehow superior. I've done more. And that schooling, that time of devotion, one of the most important things I hope it teaches you is humility. And we'll see that as we move forward through the series. But let's look at these big three. What he devoted himself to back into Ezra 7:10, he devoted himself to study, obey, and teach the law of the Lord and all of God's decrees in Israel. Study, obey, teach. Now, the order there is important. If you mix up that order, you get something that is unhealthy. If he devoted himself to teach first and then study, well, what's he going to teach? He doesn't know what direction he's going. If he devoted himself to study, then teach it, then obey, well, that's a recipe for hypocrisy, because he hasn't actually gone through the struggle of trying to live out what he's teaching first and seeing what it looks like in real life. You're going to get much more powerful application if you've applied it to yourself first. So order is essential. And now let's break down those three. What do you think it means to devote yourself to study? Paul says to Timothy, study to show yourself approved. So Peyton, what do you think what does study look like for a teacher that is a little different from just an average person or a regular Christian? Everybody should study, but what is different about the studying of a teacher?
So I think with the study of a teacher, you're actually going deeper than just reading and thinking about it. We start you on the journey and through the word, but in order to actually produce something like that, the amount of work, Chris will tell you, it takes 8 hours probably for every 8 minutes of presentation that he has to study. And so I think it's a difference between being someone who's just a casual athlete and someone who is a pro athlete, right? You're doing that intensely all day if you're a pro athlete versus like 30 minutes after work.
Yeah. And that study comes with, remember, in that definition of devoted, dedicated with a sense of responsibility. That study comes with a sense of responsibility. I'm not just digging in to see, hey, I wonder what I can find here. Oh, that's some great insight. That's great. There's a responsibility. I'm responsible to deliver this faithfully. I've got to get this message right. And in some cases, there are commentaries that disagree with each other. And which way do I turn with that? Or maybe I'm struggling to see the big picture, where this verse fits into the entire paragraph or chapter or book. All of those things, as a teacher, I'm responsible to get those faithfully. Yeah. And James warns us that you're not going to be perfect. If you're perfect with your words, you're a perfect person. Well, heads up, you're not a perfect person. And so you got to know you're going to make those mistakes, and you will be responsible for them. So minimize them by hitting the books, digging in to study.
Chris, another thing, and I love that you bring this out. You even brought this in on the big picture journey, where you said, look, we're not even asking for you to agree with us. We're asking you to search it out for yourself. And sometimes on our team, we have different views. But I love that when you're a teacher, you get to study the different views from godly men. They're not essential things. They're non-essential truths. People think differently about communion and baptism and some of these secondary things. And it's okay for everybody to come out with different convictions and conclusions on non-essential matters. But part of your responsibility as a teacher is to read a vast array of opinions, because you're going to get asked about that. And you mentioned humility earlier. I have changed my view a number of times, so many times during my Christian walk, that breeds a certain degree of humility. I don't trust my convictions or my conclusions as much as I used to when I was younger, because I don't know everything.
And with that study, we talked about the 8 hours that it takes per 8 minutes. There's also 20 years behind that. There are multiple times that I've taught it before and developed it and grown more insight. And I keep my notes. I keep all my notes from my 20 years of teaching, and I keep Each book of the Bible, I've got a notebook where I keep them multiple times. I've studied through, taught through, and I keep getting more out of that. And there is a humbling that comes with, oh, I think I was wrong about that the last time I taught it. And I take responsibility for that. There's Through the Word episodes where I've gone back and say, when I taught this the first time, I presented something that wasn't quite balanced. And here's what God has shown me as well. All of that comes with a dedication to study over a lifetime. Well, Ezra devoted himself to study. Next, he devoted himself to obedience, to obey, to not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. As James says, you've got to do what it says. And this is critical, of course. This should be self-evident, but it is so easily missed. Peyton, how do you think a teacher can devote themselves to avoid hypocrisy? How do we set ourselves about teaching in such a way that we don't become the hypocrite know-it-all, but actually live it out?
I think the best way to answer that question, I love the verse where Paul tells Timothy, the hardworking farmer must be the first to partake of the crops. In other words, you're out there farming, you're working the ground, you eat that first. And I think for us, we have to make sure that we're eating whatever it is that we're pulling up out of the word as a hardworking farmer. We've got to eat the crops first. Then our people, we can feed others with it.
Yeah, I love the example of there was a board of directors for an airline some years ago that committed themselves to they're going to eat airline food for their meals each time they meet together. I can't remember what airline that was, but we've got to do that as teachers. We've got to be living it out first. And then the third thing, of course, is finally the focus of what we're doing is the teach. He devoted himself to teach. Ezra was a teacher and he devoted himself, that sense of responsibility, to the craft of teaching. And for me, there's more to that than just saying, okay, I'm going to get up and say what it says. There is a methodology to teaching well. And that's what this podcast is all about. That's what this series is all about. There's a way to get it right. I am a much better teacher today than I was 20 years ago. I'm a better teacher, I hope, than I was 2 years ago, because I always want to be devoted to learn and grow in the teaching craft and to get it better. We've got to recognize the fact that we are not born perfect. We don't simply have a set of gifts that are complete. When Jesus says, be perfect, the word perfect there, it doesn't mean without ever making a mistake. The Old English use of the word perfect means a finished work. And so we fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. In the same way that we do that in our faith, we do that in our teaching. Allow Jesus to keep working on us, to keep perfecting us. Allow the Holy Spirit to keep improving our craft. And we do that through this series. And with that, we are out of time. So I'm going to close this up. That will do it for part 2 in the Heart of Teaching. Thanks for joining us at Teach Through the Word, the podcast for Bible teachers. Tomorrow, we will get our first essential of preparation, How do you prepare a message? And we will dig into Nehemiah's story later this week, Nehemiah 8, and we're going to find Ezra later in his story. All that's coming up later this week. Each week here at Teach Through the Word, we bring you one Bible book or one basic training like this week, or coming soon, one guest teacher interview as we equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. Peyton, thanks for joining me. Jonathan, again, nice work in the director's chair. We will see all of you back here next time.